I work in Parity. We have a really huge and one of the most well-adopted code bases for blockchains in general. We call it the Polkadot SDK, previously known as Substrate. I focus a lot on builders and developers that are coming into the ecosystem, trying to help developers make sense of it, to help them to build parachains, dApps, and so forth. The beauty of this technology is it's decentralized. And it's not just decentralized in code, it's decentralized in geography. Back in the day, so I live in Singapore, I would dream of going to Silicon Valley, right? As a computer science guy, you want to be where the action is. So everybody used to dream of going to Silicon Valley. But the reality in Web3 is that you can make your dreams within your very own house, within your own location. And I first got to know of decentralized technology when we first looked at the first Bitcoin white paper. But then when I came into the next cycle, somewhere in this 2016, 2017 era, you start to realize that, there's all these emerging technologies, all these new things to actually build. Along came smart contracts, and along came upgradable blockchains, and all the things that Polkadot represents. I was amazed by it, and I felt that maybe it wasn't a phenomenon that I could do at home. But they reached out to me, and I was very surprised that I could actually be involved. 2 years later, here I am, still working on some of the most exciting code bases. And we've seen a lot of projects come out of the ecosystem that, are in places that are surprising. Singapore, Vietnam, parts of Thailand, and various parts of Europe, Eastern Europe. So it honestly doesn't matter when it comes to where you are. It matters more about the quality of your code and the content of your character. And that's what I really love about this space. And it helped me realize the world is going to change completely. And it's just the start. When I was a teenager, 18, 19 years old, that's how I first got to know about Bitcoin, right? And at that time, you're kind of like the kid who does things in a defiant way. Probably that kid that uses peer-to-peer software like BitTorrent, just so that you can find the latest music, and you don't have much else to do. So you were in this kind of environment where you're a little bit anarchist, right? And out of this environment, you see Bitcoin, right? And you realize wait, if this can be shut down, it probably should be valuable. And that's where I got started, even before I was even a computer science student. Then many years later, you realize you forget about these things. You grow up and you think that the world should be the way it was taught by the people above me. The people who came before said that you're supposed to take a job in established industries like banking. Having gone to these places, I then realized that the core problems within these institutions cannot be fixed and are only getting worse. And I think over the years, we see it exacerbate itself. COVID was just a key example where we're in the heart of a lockdown. Everyone was indoors. Productivity was at least slashed. Unemployment was all-time high. But by the end of 2020, the S&P 500 has broken beyond its all-time highs. How can real assets that represent the productivity of human capital, be more valuable when everyone is not doing their job? And then realize that these fundamental problems exist and they continue to persist. We see that with the transformation of the Ukraine war and how central banks are very skeptical of certain jurisdictions. We see the trust between institutions starting to crumble. And we need a way for them to talk without trusting each other. We need more truth without trust. And it starts to come together that really blockchain is the solution. And so it represents a push from macroeconomics into this new era of technology while the technology itself looks awfully like a revolution of the dot-com era. So you got waves upon waves of innovation and technology, which cannot represent what I did in banking. In Web2 world, I had to do a lot of deal making to make things happen. But right now, you don't need to do any of that. It's in code. You can build one application upon another application, and you don't need to do any deal making to do that. And the cycle of innovation is far outpacing anything in the traditional world or in traditional finance. When I got so excited about all these things about the industry, you start to ask yourself, like, which ecosystem represents the core technology and its advancement and can do that sustainably. We need a system that can predict the future without necessarily doing it. So we need a system that is generalizable. We need a system that's able to think about the future without specifying it today. And I think Polkadot, with its an underlying generalized design, is the way forward. The trend of Web3 is very similar to the trend of Web2 infrastructure. So you first had application-specific computers, and that's what the first ever application-specific computer was to crack the code of the Nazis. That was the first ever computer in the world. The first ever application-specific blockchain was Bitcoin. Then later on, Apple invented the Apple I. It represented the ability for a bunch of hobbyists to create their own personal computer. And that was what Substrate and Polkadot represents. You could create your own blockchain and customize it any way you want. In Web2, then the industry moved from just talking about individual computers to networks of computers, the World Wide Web. There were standards of communication between computers. And in Polkadot, we have XCM, a standard messaging template, which could then be used and processed, and depending on which protocols, can be then used for bridging and all sorts of purposes. So Polkadot is going to be a decentralized network of computers on demand, much like cloud computing. And if anything about the cloud computing journey tells us is this makes it so much easier for developers at a click of a button. We are in a world where trust is an all-time low, and it's about computation that we can trust. So if you see in the world today, we have huge advances in AI. We have generative AI that could basically regenerate this video and make me say anything I want. But then the question is, how do we trust what is said? So the truth in the content becomes an issue. Decentralized computing solves that. So with all these advances in AI, it will completely disrupt truth. It's going to be the greatest thing to humanity in terms of productivity, but it's also going to be the greatest threat to truth in our human society. Democracies will be threatened. Elections will be threatened. The future of what's real is going to be threatened. And I think the tech of decentralized computing and what Web3 really stands for is valuable because it's the only solution, the only tech solution for this. It's not a policy, it's not wishful thinking, it's infrastructure to actually get the job done. None of that stuff in World Economic Forum, but actual tech that will solve problems and let us move into a new era of human society that we need not debate about truth. We don't need to debate about it. We'll just look at the code and accept that it has been done, and we will move forward. Instead of conflict, it's about truth. Instead of disagreement, it's about removing trust. And I think in a world where wars could be a high potential probable outcome, I think this technology potentially brings peace. This industry will represent $3 trillion magnitude waves in human trends. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, was the trust between institutions are broken and they need an alternative way for trust. an alternative way to trust the AI compute that has been going out there, the generative content that is out there. And it has to be on the same magnitude as what the AI valuations exist today. So that's one huge area to address. The second area is macroeconomics, where as institutions trust less between each other, central banks are looking for ways to look for stores of value. And we see them trying to acquire gold. And the properties of these highly valued deflationary tokens represents very similar concepts to Bitcoin. And it will be the next $1 trillion trend. And the final $1 trillion trend that governments are trying to solve within their operations and their systems, they are looking for ways to optimize policy making. And the blockchain and the tech stack of the blockchain is the easiest way to create systems and social and conventions that, yes, we have actually experimented with OpenGov. If I had to add one final $1 trillion market, tokenization, because every single asset class out there can be represented in form of assets on-chain. In other words, anything that's valuable in our human society can be represented by something that's a function or order of magnitude of the backchain. So with all this, it's probably the most important piece of technology we need to get right in our human society. Open governance, I think, represents the ability to have a stake in the future of the technology. I think in many other ecosystems, a lot of the power resides in the core developers of the technology. So if you're from the labs equivalent of any other ecosystem, traditionally, you pretty much have a say in the execution of the latest upgrades, and that is not decentralized. And that will be very difficult for this technology to be truly resilient. So OpenGov is necessary for us to move forward. You might say it's a social experiment, but it's new organization. It's its new ecosystem where we quite literally see a network state form, where these people recognize themselves. I might be a Singapore citizen, but now I'm also a citizen of Polkadot. I vote upon the things that matter to the furtherment of Web3 and the furtherment of the ideas and ideals that decentralization represents. In some sense, I'm a dual, triple citizen. And I think that's amazing. And that every single person who holds the underlying tokens have that say. And that's a really, really exciting environment that we're in. How do we build a community of people that is able to be sustainable and at some point call themselves a country, a network state? So definitely you want a system where people get funded to do the most productive things that further that society. And I think that's the same question that you would ask yourself, what would a good country do? Well, a good country would implement the right policies. It would hear from its citizens. It will value every vote. And it will make the right decisions. And the sustainability of Polkadot really depends on and how it's designed is really designed down to the economic system of Polkadot. The treasury represents this pool of funds through the DOT token to enable these productive projects. And how it's funded is actually depending on the mechanisms. And by the way, we can change them because the beauty of policy making is you can change it with upgradability. But it's currently designed such that your inflationary rewards a portion of that, and the difference goes into the treasury, keeping sustainable amounts that goes to the treasury. It's a question that you might ask for a government as well. How do you keep your coffers well? The answer would probably be some form of taxation, some form of creating an interest rate in order to get that amount in to be able to do some good government spending. So in the same way, it's no different. We probably use the different vocabulary, but it's very similar when it comes to the ethos of what makes good governance. And I think that's what everybody wants. Like, everybody's not trying to say, my country is better than your country. We're not, the average citizen doesn't want to go to war. The average citizen just wants a better government. And I think that's what Polkadot's trying to solve. I think the beauty of a decentralized treasury and decentralized funds and its reach all over the world is we find most productive use cases and developers from the most unlikeliest places. And in some cases, it goes to places where costs are low. And so it's really optimal compared to the Web2 world where everything is depending on your jurisdiction. And as a result of that, we find so much productivity and use cases even from tiny amounts of funds. One of the famous quotes I remember is, the world talent is equally distributed. There's talent everywhere. Any person that's born today has the same amount of chance to be as intelligent as someone else. But opportunity is not equally distributed today. We should create a world where opportunity is equally distributed. Because it doesn't matter where you are. It matters your quality of your character and your content. When it comes to, definitely from like, hiring talent, the costs, the numbers are very favorable for anyone looking for talent in Asia. The desire to get into the space is much more. When it comes to even their interest in signing up for developer talks and all that, the traction is much bigger. The go-to-market opportunities are very high as well, even at the institutional level, because the policy making has never been as well defined, even in the traditional sense. So they're very interested in new opportunities. So some of the projects in, for example, Indonesia are starting off even at the policy level for the government, at the municipal level for the government, for blockchain. So I think that's really what emerging markets in places like Asia really represents. And yeah, I'm very excited about it. This problem that Web3 and blockchain is trying to solve in Polkadot is probably the most meaningful problem for our lives and the future of our children and their children. Everything we do here will be recorded in history. It will be. The numbers that we demonstrate, even from anything that we talk about, will be looked upon as if it's crazy. It will be looked upon like, are you kidding? Did this really happen? But we are living it right here, right now. And I wouldn't change a thing about what I would be doing. And I encourage everyone to take a second look at what we're doing. Because this is a paradigm shift in human society. It's not yet another incremental thing. This is in the history books. And then, of course, being a core part of the ecosystem, we are sort of like a node of information. So anything about research and best practices is something that we will want to reflect in the Alpha program.